Sheriff's Department, we have Acting Sheriff Anthony LaRocque. Actually, before we do that, Brian Sullivan, the President of the Correction Officers Benevolent Association, would like to say a few words.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Brian Sullivan, President, Nassau County Correction Officers Benevolent Association. I'll be brief. That's a joke. I may go a minute over. Thank you for giving me a couple minutes to speak here. Just touching on something that the police commissioner actually said earlier. There was a question about mental health inmates that are at the jail. Commissioner Ryder actually said that 98% of people that are involved with mental health issues don't come into the system. That I do believe to be completely correct. Also, what we are holding, just to be sure, since bail reform, what we are holding in our correctional facility now are the absolute bad guys. There's not, everybody gets released. Our head count is down precipitously from where it was several years ago, but we are absolutely holding the worst of the worst in our facility, violent people that commit bad crimes. This is the stuff that we're dealing with. Again, I want to, I'll take this opportunity quick to congratulate Anthony LaRocque being named the acting sheriff for now. I've known Anthony quite a long time, and I'm looking forward to hopefully a fruitful and good relationship with him. I think we are both on the same page on many, many issues, and since he was named, we've made significant progress on several issues that I couldn't get done with the prior two administrations, as much as I was banging my head against the wall with things. But again, I appreciate this because it is a bit of an effort when you work in corrections to get the message out from behind the walls. We're not the police, we're not outside, we're not even probation. When things go on behind the walls of a correctional facility, it's hard to get the message out. The one thing that I need to stress in my message is, again, I joked about all of this stuff. These are my notes going back to 2016, 2017. I can probably submit this to you, and you're going to hear a lot of the same stuff that I've talked about before. Number one on the agenda is staffing. We've heard a lot about staffing here today in other departments. I've been at this podium countless times over the past couple of years. That's on my top of my agenda. For informational purposes, last year, I stated here that since January of 2018, we've hired 131 correction officers. In that same time period, we lost 191. That equates to a net loss of 60 correction officers in 3 years, up until last year. I can update those numbers with the following. Since January of 2018 to today, we've hired 155 correction officers and lost 234, equating to an updated net loss of 79. That's 19 more in the hole than we were this time last year. When I brought this up numerous times to the current administration, I was met several times with the same reaction, that staffing is still an issue. We just hired 48 people. We thought we corrected your issues there. Simply put, over the last several years, we're not keeping up with attrition, resignations. One thing that we have in this job is losses to other jobs. People don't want to work in corrections. When you get called for something else, you leave. So we don't keep up with the attrition. In a little more detail, in 2018, we hired 57 officers, lost 46. In 2019, we hired 23, lost 42. In 2020, the year of COVID, we hired 0 because of COVID and lost 68 correction officers to retirements. 2021, we hired 48, lost 51, and to date this year, we've hired 27, and again, to date, have lost 27 this year. We have a significant staffing problem in this department, had a staffing problem this time last year. Our officers are forced to work a lot of mandated overtime. It's an ongoing issue that doesn't ever seem to get resolved. We have retention problems and certainly have recruitment problems. We have to address these issues so we don't go any further down this rabbit hole. Yes, our department has contracted due to the insanity of bail reform that we all continue to grapple with. If you all remember, us in corrections, going back 4 or 5 years ago, we're up here sounding, I was here numerous times, and in Albany, sounding the bell on bail reform, and everybody thought we were lying. I was nuts. I just wanted more overtime for correction officers. My, what a difference we have now. It's the rallying cry for everybody, but I digress. Currently in our present state, we calculate that we should have a little over 800 officers working here, including through supervisory ranks. This budget, proposed budget, calls for a head count of 790. Okay, we disagree by a few, that's fine. The problem is actually hiring and backfilling that 790. Last year, the department had an approved budget of 783. Our actual on-board head count was 726. That's 57 less bodies than was budgeted. Yet, year after year, we keep hearing about the cost of overtime at the jail. As of today, we have 98 COBA members through all ranks with 25 years or more on our job. Once again, our retirement is based on 25 years of service, so those people could go at any time at their option. We currently have 40 COBA members with 30 or more years on the job. By mid-2023, we will have an additional 23 hit that 30-year mark. That's 63 by mid-year 2023 with over 30 years on the job. Some of them stick around for another year or two, or depending on how old they are, you have to be 55 to leave. This all has to be taken into account, much like it is in the police department, as I'll talk about in one quick second. For comparison, I point to the public safety summary in the proposed budget. As stated clearly every year under the police department, their proposed budget maintains a sworn head count that includes additional classes to offset anticipated attrition. It also increases their supervisory head count. For the Sheriff's Department, the budget funds 2 classes of up to 30 correction officers in March and July of 2023. In last year's proposed budget, there was supposed to be 2 classes of 40 recruits hired in 2022. To date, like I said, we hired 27. Again, we lost 27. So again, I ask why we can never seem to get over this hump and this disparity of having these queues ready to replace people as they go. Additionally, it has to be noted that this problem in hiring and proper staffing reverberates through the rank structure of our department, as it prevents us from properly promoting staff into the higher ranks. What is not taken into account with much of the attrition is that our higher ranking staff are amongst those that usually retire more often. It's not just an officer issue. Currently, we're short dozens of corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, captains throughout our rank structure. We haven't done any meaningful promotions here in almost 5 years. I know there is talk about promotions now, and I'm hopeful that it's going to happen soon. But we haven't had any meaningful promotions in about 5 years. We have lost close to 40 supervisors through all ranks and only promoted, to my knowledge, about 6 in that same time frame. On to training. Overall, our training regimen continues to remain severely lacking when compared to other municipalities, where a 40-hour yearly training regimen is the norm. It applies particularly in our supervisory ranks, where training for supervisors is almost non-existent here for years. That's a holdover from prior administrations, needs to be addressed. In the end, lack of training relates to liability on the part of the county. Again, as I stated last year, this proposed budget summary under goals states the department shall create policies and procedures designed to maintain officer safety, maintain or increase the current level of training, policies and procedures, hold officers accountable for their understanding of policies and procedures, and I say here year after year, what exactly are our officers expected to understand and be held accountable for if they're lacking training on an ongoing basis. As to other issues, I've talked here several times, and you probably, if you follow any of my social media, about HALT. The average person in the street doesn't understand what HALT is: humane alternatives to long-term incarceration, long-term solitary confinement. That is a misnomer in and of itself. Solitary confinement does not exist in New York State, no matter how much somebody can stand up here and say that it does. What we have in New York State is administrative segregation. It's basically jail within a jail. If you commit a crime in jail, you have to be separated from the general population to keep the inmates and the officers safe. HALT is not only not humane, it's a complete fallacy. This past April, HALT legislation that was imposed by the state was put into place. Our union, along with our downstate partners in corrections, fought this legislation because it's dangerous, promotes violence in our jail, and more importantly for our purposes here today, is an unfunded mandate. We're no longer able to separate violent predatory inmates from the general population of inmates. It is our job to protect the general population from predators, and that job was made almost impossible by the New York State Legislature and signed into law by the former Governor Cuomo. Since April of this year, when HALT went into effect, incidents necessitating the use of force by our officers to stop violent acts of inmates has doubled. This is a direct result of HALT. If you're not familiar with HALT, it's basically, like I said, bail reform in jail. open up the door and let everybody out together. You cannot separate violent predators. The entire premise behind it is a fallacy based on a false narrative that not only endangers our staff but the inmate population. We need to address locally what the state has dumped on us and refuses to acknowledge the trail of wreckage that it has created. I'll be glad to sit down with any of you and go over the details of that. That's not for today. As for being budget related, we in the unions fought to have chapter amendments done to this law to roll back some of the halt provisions to make our jails safer. We were minimally successful, but one amendment that was made by the state and without our agreement was to carve out mandated training, both in the recruit academy and for yearly in-service training that was in the original law but removed because of the associated expenses. So now we're stuck with HALT, its ramifications, its unfunded mandates on the counties, the carve-out of any associated training, and most assuredly civil liability to the counties, all counties in New York State, that they will now bear. And it's obvious that we're living in the bizarro world in New York State. I think everybody here can, to a certain amount, agree with that. We sincerely hope that, and I've talked about this before, I think I said it last year, about the opioid money that came in, that whatever the $100 and something million, that part of that money can be carved out for the Sheriff's Department, the Division of Correction, for the jail, to provide programs and training in the Sheriff's Department where we deal with violent, many times mentally unstable and drug-addicted individuals on a daily basis, particularly in the wake of HALT. We have to find ways to combat insane legislation that comes down from Albany and protect our officers and help our officers protect inmates from violent inmates. It's just insane that people think this stuff works. As we see every year now, not just in Nassau County but all over the state, the prioritized objective coming down from the state with corrections is to get people out of the system and back on the street as soon as possible, all in the name of saving on the cost of incarceration. That all started with the insanity of bail reform. This is not reform. This is all an effort to cut the cost of incarceration, get people out of the system while providing no safety nets, drug programs, mental health treatment, etc., for that offender, to dump them back with no public safety considerations, with the simple release of people who need help in the first place and many times only get it when they are incarcerated and they're put there under a judge's order and forced into programs. Absolutely no regard for the victims of crime, many times violent crime, who we all see plain as day, including our law enforcement officers, are completely left out of any conversation when it comes to criminal justice reforms statewide. I don't know what it's going to take for this mindset to turn around, but putting the onus only on the violent predators, the violent people that are committing crimes in our state, leaving people in the street unprotected, leaving correction officers unprotected in jails and inmates in jails that we're sworn to protect, does not work. And if the state won't do it, I come to you and I come to the people in the county to help us figure out how to do it on a local level. I'll send you a copy of my thing here today, and I'll resend you a copy of things that I've said over and over and over again. I joke sometimes like Khrushchev. I'm up here banging my shoe on the table. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brian, as always.
Thank you.
It.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank Presiding Officer Nicolello and my Minority Leader Abrahams for inviting me here today. My name is Anthony LaRocca, and I am the Acting Sheriff. My priorities are to maintain a safe and secure correctional center for both inmates and staff, while always keeping my eye on the objective, by being fiscally prudent and keeping in mind the wallets of the tax-paying residents. Following this, sorry, what page? That's the right page. I'm sorry. Oh. In my first week as acting sheriff, I directed the SIR team to do a facility-wide search, which has not been done during the tenure of the past two sheriffs. This provided to be fruitfully by uncovering a large assortment of contraband, including weapons and drugs. This successful operation made the lives of officers and inmates alike safer. Following this search, I have implemented the use of the Tech 84 to search inmates upon leaving the visiting area before returning to their respective housing units. Now I will briefly discuss my 2023 budget presentation. The correctional officers' budgeted headcount is 790, and currently we have 726 on board. We'll be putting in a correctional officers class which will keep us up to the attrition and our budgeted headcount. Since the onset of bail reform, the inmate count has been low. We are averaging approximately 730 inmates. I have put in a request with the county executive's office, and they have approved 50 promotions. In comparison, under the previous administrations, only 5 promotions were made. This depleted all supervisory ranks and created unnecessary overtime expenses. This will boost morale, spread responsibilities throughout the ranks, and reduce the overtime spending. Also, I am reviewing all staffing and lineups and my administrative staff to ensure that we are utilizing the correct amount of post coverage and staffing. After careful review of the 2021 and 2022 budget, I am confident that we'll be able to mitigate the 2023 overtime costs down to the projected amount. I have already begun assessing all available resources and restructuring of staffing plans and post coverages in order to ensure maximum utilization of all staff, while also providing safety to all correctional center employees and inmates. Many of these changes we'll be implementing is to correct the mismanagement practices of the prior 2 sheriffs over the last 4 years. We have established a new relationship with the NUMC. I have toured the former locked ward in the hospital, and we are working with the hospital's administration to get the prison ward updated and functional as soon as possible. The reason we decided to open this ward is twofold: safety and security for all staff, patients, and their families, and a tremendous overtime savings by placing inmates in a secured area. I would never sacrifice the safety or security of either the staff or the inmates to save money. This is why I am doing a comprehensive top-to-bottom assessment of all operations. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Legislators do as well. In terms of staffing,
Right.
is there a plan for another class this year?
I believe so. By the end of the year, there will be another class.
What's the projected number of that class?
If I may, I will planning on doing this class of 40, probably in November. That's what the time frame is.
So the recruits, as of now, they're recruiting people. Is there an indication that you're actually going to get the 40?
Yes, I believe so, that we have 40 ready to go. I think it's a question of timing and getting them into the building and finishing up the last few steps of processing. So,
and the plan for 2023 is?
It's 2 classes of 30. I'll say it this way. If there's a need for more, we will adjust that. But right now, we plan on getting back to the same numbers as where we're at. The overtime number in the correctional facility, from a budgetary standpoint, not from an operational side, the sheriff stated, was astronomical. We found some things that were not managed correctly, and to throw more people at it at the beginning until we had a structure and I'll give the sheriff his due time, we didn't think it was prudent to just keep throwing a lot of classes at it. So there was I have a little bit more confidence now that we're going to have a little bit.
I understand what you're saying, but when staffing reaches record lows and it's dropping every year, I think you have to expect overtime to go up. You simply don't have the same bodies.
Agreed.
So are you going to be able to reverse the trend that Brian spoke about of attrition exceeding the number of incoming recruits, corrections officers?
I would say yes. We're going to get back up to the number to contain overtime as a result of that. So,
all right. So we will be watching and we'll be pushing from our end.
And we appreciate that too.
Okay. Also, on the civil side, I also have an understanding that the deputy sheriff's numbers are down. So what's any plan to?
We're adding 10 new deputy sheriffs. There's some testing issue. I'll defer to Sheriff LaRocca here, but there was some testing issue that prevented us from hiring or something like that. I'm not very informed on that. But we had an additional 10 for next year, bringing that number up. So,
do you know what that issue was? Has that issue been resolved?
I believe so. It's being resolved at this time. It was the age limit.
it was something to do with the state testing is
Right.
what I understand it as.
All right, so we'll follow up tomorrow to get more concrete information.
Yeah.
Sorry, sit next to you. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. So, you're hiring the 40, I guess, from a current list that we have, correct?
That's correct.
How many applicants are still on that, like, for next year? Do you have a large pool of
40, is it 40?
people?
Another 40.
It's approximately 40 more. It will be high at 40 more.
40?
Yeah, there's an additional 40 on the, for the
You mean
next
list
tranche.
Okay.
Itself, or the hiring?
But, I mean, what I'm saying is, how big is the list? That's what I should say, yeah.
I do not know the answer to that.
Because when was this test given? Was this the recent test, or?
It's a state test. I don't know the dates on that. I will say that.
But it would have been administered by the county.
Yeah, but it's
So-
through the state, though. That's when the state sets the guidelines when the test dates are for
Okay,
that, so.
because I know that, like, you'll give a test, and then you establish a list based on civil service. And then if you have like 800 people on the list, you start hiring, and then after a certain amount of time, we give another test, so that list is now void, and we start anew. Do we have enough people on this list to, so for the 40 that you want to bring in this year, and then you're saying for next year, you want to hire only 60, a total of 60?
That's the plan right now, to get us up. But if the attrition numbers start spiking up, we may have to adjust the 30, so. So let me go back to your point is, that I think there's enough on the list to get to the next 40. And I think there might be more on there to give us more if we need for next year's classes, so.
Okay, because then that leads me to ask then, if we know that we have attrition and you're giving a class, so I've never attended any of these academies, so I don't know. But if you're utilizing instructors in an academy to instruct, like, say, 40 candidates or 30 candidates, wouldn't it be more cost-effective to bring in next year, at the beginning of the year, the 60 new people? If you're going to hire a total of 60 in 2023, wouldn't it be more cost-effective to bring them in all at once, because you're going to utilize the same instructors? I mean, the classrooms of the schools should be big enough to be able to accommodate 60 candidates. But, because you're paying people to teach them, so if you, instead of teaching 30 and 30, teach 60 all at once, wouldn't that be better?
I'll say it this way is that this class is a shorter class than I would say the police class, so I don't know if the number, I can't answer that on the training side, but we can do, if we do a class in November, we could do another class in January on top of it and keep the instructors moving in the same direction. We can accelerate classes, we can slow them down. There's a way of doing it with the overtime with the instructors and everything
I know
else.
you could do, like, in the evenings
We
or
can do,
whatever.
we can do 2 classes if we have to, I think. So I think that there's a method to the madness, but it's not like 120s. I don't know how it's going to impact training. That's what I don't know. I'm not the expert in that way.
Because
but
I think that we need to look at, how can we bring them in sooner, these new correction officers sooner rather than later?
I
Because you
agree
may
with you.
find all of a sudden in the summer, those 98 members that are eligible to retire may all of a sudden decide, you know what? For some odd reason, Florida is beckoning them, and they want out of here. So I would encourage you. I know that, aside, let me think, I'm trying to think. You had, there was, I think maybe I read in this, that you were looking to consolidate some of the buildings, or, what exactly does that entail? What do you-
Well, basically, we can move inmates into areas that aren't full, for instance, dorms and tiers, and that would close down other parts of the correctional center, which also would have an effect on how, manpower, correctional officers, and would actually cut the overtime by doing so.
But I know that one of the issues that we have is that a lot of the people who are incarcerated seem to be from gangs, and for the safety of the other inmates, as well as the correction officers, that it seems to be better to have the different gang members, I think, separated from rival gangs.
The problem with that is there is no segregation at this time. We can't take them and segregate them based on their gang affiliation. So what happens, what I've witnessed myself from touring the correctional center in the past 3 weeks, is some of these gang members, what they'll do is they'll go into PC as a group. There'll be 20 or even 30 of them in one dorm or one tier, and they segregate themselves.
Okay. All right, I'm just, considering the safety. Even with the mental health component, I know that President Sullivan was talking about, like possibly using opioid funding to help, address that because of the inmates, I should say, that do have mental health issues.
Right.
And, sometimes we think that they should have gotten help before. It's sad that they end up in jail, but there they are. Are you looking at trying to apply for this, and do you have any programs? Are you looking to enhance anything to, with the programs to help a lot of these people who have these mental health issues?
Not that I'm aware of. Like I said, I've only been here 3 weeks, so it's
okay.
kind of, I'm got a
You
lot
gotta
of
be
catching
fast
up.
learner.
Yeah, it's pretty
sorry, I didn't
overwhelming.
realize it,
But
and I
I think
apologize.
maybe
It's
Narda
good.
could answer that question.
No, I think, if I may, I think on intake, there's an evaluation done of the inmate when they come through the door of if there was a need for mental health, and that's what happens. It's on
Right.
intake, they evaluate them. It's through NUMIC, I think they come over and they do an evaluation of the inmate when they walk through the door if there is a mental condition that needs to be addressed, so.
What you mean by funding? You actually talking about these monies that were being sent from the federal government?
Yeah.
That I'm not aware of at this moment.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll hopefully see if there's anything that can be done to
Yeah.
help in that situation. I do like your
Sure.
approach that you want to open up the ward back in the jail to help, take care of the.
Right, the
some of
hospital ward.
The hospital ward, and obviously you'll be staffing it with
Correctional
Nassau
officers.
County CSEA people.
That's
so,
correct.
Yeah, which
Well, not CSA, staffing as far as what, doctors and nurses.
Yeah,
Yes.
they probably would come from NUMC.
Right,
correct?
we'd have
Yeah.
to contract with the medical center, with NUMIC?
Part of the current contract we have with them right now,
Right.
so.
I do like this. My last thing also is I know that we've always had issues with the visitors centers, and so I'm hoping that we can continue to improve it so that it's easier for the inmates to have visits from their family and friends. I know that, I don't know if you still do any of the remote, because I know during COVID, sometimes you allowed Zoom meetings or whatever. I don't know I don't even know right now.
I believe right now we're back to post-pandemic visitation.
Yeah.
The pandemic, the CDC guidelines are no longer in effect.
And I haven't, and the last time I was there, I know that they were going to build a new visitor center, holding center,
Yes.
where they could stay, which is covered, so that if the weather is bad, they're not out in the snow and rain or whatever.
Right.
Has that, I haven't been there since that's been installed.
There is a shelter that sits in the parking lot adjacent to the 832 building.
It's like a trailer, right?
No, it's not a trailer, actually. It's just an enclosed, looks like a plexiglass shelter, or, pretty much.
All right. I'll have to, that's what I'm thinking too, is it does, I'm gonna have to take a visit. I wanna take a
Yeah.
look at that. Because, I know that, I was under the impression that they were gonna put in something that had heat or maybe air conditioning while they were waiting, but I could be wrong. So, we'll have a discussion later. All right, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I encourage you to please, let's accelerate this hiring, okay?
Any other legislators? Legislator Walker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And Brian, thank you for always being so right on and telling us just what's happening over there. So appreciate that. And Sheriff, you certainly hit the ground running. So
Thank you very much.
I too am very concerned about the our getting the numbers up for our corrections officers, for the safety of those prisoners who are there, and certainly for the safety of our workers, because when they're forced to work overtime, overtime is great, and you say like, oh, it's nice money, but sometimes after a while, and they're there really too long, and I always worry, because that's when mistakes can happen, and they get tired, and you don't want to put them in a bad position, and you certainly don't want to put the inmates in a bad position either because of that situation. So I really hope that we can increase those numbers as quickly as possible, and it's a little scary when you describe things. I mean, we've all toured our facility, but when you think that you have rival gangs all in, you're not allowed to segregate them, and things that you're not allowed to do by law, yet it could really present a dangerous situation for themselves as well as for our workers there. And I guess anything that we can help you with, like you said, if it's not working on a state level, and Brian brought this up too, if it's not happening up there, then if we have to work on a local level, what we can do to ensure the safety of everyone, I think we all need to be on the same page with that. So, again, I thank you very much for your presentation, and
Quite welcome.
like I said, you really did hit the ground running.
Any other legislators? All right, Sheila Bino. Legislator Bino, sorry.
That's fine, that's fine. That's my birth name. That's like giving a name at birth. No, mine is the legislator. Question about, greetings. Question about how you, first of all, nice to meet you. Never
Thank
met
you.
you before. And I've visited the jail along with my colleagues on both sides of this aisle. And I do recollect that we were going to do something a little bit more substantive for folks that were visiting the facility. So I will join Legislator Ford in looking at that. But in terms of the physical plant, the physical conditions there, we visited, and there were things that were concerning to us some time ago. There were hazards for both our officers and the inmates. And one of the things that we were really concerned about, which I spoke to DPW about just the other day, were roof leaks. And, you know, you said you're doing a top-down review of the facility. I'd really like to, you know, have you debrief us at some point when you get there. But in particular, I'd like to hear about your assessment, your physical assessment of the facility.
No problem.
Very concerned, we have been over the years, about the conditions there. I know that under the prior administration, there was some level of an advancement as to technology that was going to be installed and things like that. But I'd like to get an assessment from you, really, as soon as you can, about the conditions there, because it's important that we address those things. In terms of the relationship between the jail and the medical center, I definitely would love to see oversight there as well. You know, to this point, since we've moved from Armour, I think we've made significant headway, and I wouldn't want to see us, spin out of control and go back to those days. So my question also is regarding recreational and educational resources within the facility and ministerial services that they're getting. You say that you're back to pre-COVID days in terms of visits. How are we doing with having chaplains and the folks that come back into the facility? Are we?
I'm pretty certain. I've noticed that they've been here every day. There's quite a few that come into the correctional center on a day, like I said, on a daily basis. So it is back to normal, as far as that aspect goes.
And they're able to have the Sunday services, because I've
Yes.
actually attended a Good Friday service there and a couple other services, so they're doing back
Yes.
to having those services. And how about like educational resources and
I think there is a group that comes in with educational resources on a regular basis also.
okay. I'm sorry.
I can
DCE
just
Fox.
add a few things. So, yes, and I think last week, Sheriff, you had a meeting with the clergy at your office to introduce themselves and go over all the concerns with Sunday service and to get them ID cards that were revoked, so when they come in, they can easily come in and it's not a whole ordeal. So that was a successful meeting.
Right. I've actually received the D cards at this time.
Yes, so that was a big step forward. And also with education, we have groups that come in that volunteer. We work with LTI, we work with the school district. So we do have resources, but we're always willing to explore that further. Absolutely.
Okay, and the work program, it's a women's group that comes in.
Yes, they're phenomenal.
Okay. I found that there were less resources for women that were in there. I'd love to see if we could bolster that a bit more.
Yes. I'm drawing a blank on the woman's name. Starts with an S. I think her last name's Ligori.
Yeah, Serena Ligori.
I know
Yeah.
she has a great program, so
Yes.
that's definitely something we could explore.
Okay, very good. And then, I glossed over it when I was talking about the medical center, but it's a health-related issue. So, if folks need to be vaccinated, whether they feel that they're, for whatever reason, are we able to get folks vaccinated? Whether it be COVID vaccines, monkeypox, whatever, they're able to get those vaccines
Yes.
easily? And they can do that on-site, or are they being transported, or what's
I
happening?
believe they do it right there in the clinic.
Okay, all right, thank you. And COVID numbers, how are they looking?
I think we're contained right now. Do we have we segregate the
Right.
housing unit. I believe we just have one right
Well, I
now.
believe there's one or two at this time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Any other legislators? Nope.
If I could, just some things that were asked, I just wanted to touch on. Someone asked a question about the list, I think Legislator Ford. So right now we have, I believe it's 2018 list that we're going through. Right behind it, we have a 2019 list, once we exhaust this list, and then we have a third list that can be established. So we're in good shape with regard to the lists, so just so you know. And we have 28 applicants ready, they're fully vetted, and we have another approximately 30 that are in phase 2, which means they get their psych and their medical, and once that's cleared, we have them ready to go. So we're in a good place for our next class.
That's the next class expected to be done this year?
Yes, hopefully November.
Okay, good, very good. How long does a list last? I mean, the 2018 list is probably getting a little stale by this point.
I believe 4 years?
4 years is the
Yeah,
max.
4
right,
years.
with the extensions.
And someone asked about deputy sheriffs, I think.
Yes, I did.
So we just did promotions for deputy sheriffs in the spring. The deputy sheriff list is expiring, I believe, in April, and I believe the next exam is in June. That's all controlled by the state. That's why we are putting in 10 to hire in advance,
Right.
because we will have a short period of time without a list.
So which list will that be off? The one expiring list or the new
That's a
one?
separate list. The list I talked about before for corrections,
Right.
deputy sheriff's list, we don't have a backup list because the test got bounced because of COVID.
Okay. All right, so you can hire them provisionally?
We're going to hire 10
Right.
while we still have the list.
Oh,
We
yes,
have
okay.
until
That's what I
April,
was asking. Yeah, okay,
Correct.
yes, okay. All right, thank you.
of course.
Appreciate all of you being here. Andy, thanks for sticking around all day.
Thank you very much.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.